The Praetorian Guard, Chapter 11, Shadows in the Sky. John arrived at the Ministry of Defense just as the sun climbed higher over the gleaming towers of Nova Lux. The sprawling building, a fortress of power and security, bustled with activity as high-ranking officials, soldiers and aides moved with purpose through the halls. Despite the grandeur and importance of his surroundings, John's mind was elsewhere. His thoughts were focused on his mission, and on Kara. As he entered the building, John greeted the staff with a friendly nod, keeping his tone light and professional. The challenge of balancing his role as a covert operative for the shadows of the night, while maintaining the facade of a simple bodyguard for the ministry, weighed heavily on him. But that was the job, and he was good at it. Kara was standing by one of the large windows overlooking the city when he spotted her. She looked sharp as always, her dark hair tied back, her uniform crisp. When she saw John approaching, her expression softened into a smile.
"Morning, John,"
she said, her voice light with a hint of warmth.
"Settling in all right? Can't complain,"
John replied, offering her a grin as he approached.
"The company's better than I expected."
Kara raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips.
"Flattery already? You must be angling for a promotion."
John chuckled, the tension between them fading into something easier, more familiar.
"Just calling it as I see it."
For a brief moment, the weight of the mission seemed to lift, and John found himself slipping into the banter with ease. Kara's presence had always had that effect on him. But before he could lose himself in the lightheartedness of the moment, Kara's expression grew more serious.
"Actually, I've got some news,"
she said, lowering her voice slightly.
"I just got word that the minister will be taking a few days off, going on a solo vacation to the planet ZXF 590. He'll be traveling with his personal guards, and you're one of them."
John's brow furrowed.
"Vacation? That seems sudden."
Kara nodded.
"Yeah, it caught me off guard too. But I guess he wants to get away from the capital for a few days. Some time to relax, clear his head. He's been under a lot of pressure lately."
John thought about it, his mind racing with the possibilities. ZXF 590 was a remote planet, quiet, and known for its serene landscapes. Perfect for a private getaway. But it also meant the minister would be isolated, vulnerable. An ideal target for an assassination.
"Who else is going with him?"
John asked, trying to sound casual.
"Just his personal guard detail. And we've got 5 ships from the diplomatic guard corps of the Praetorians escorting him,"
Kara explained.
"They're going to take every precaution to make sure nothing happens while he's out there."
John nodded, absorbing the information. A convoy like that should provide more than enough protection, but John knew better than to trust appearances. The shadows had trained him to always be wary, always assume that something could go wrong. And with the recent threat to the minister's life, John wasn't about to leave anything to chance.
"Thanks for the heads up,"
John said, flashing her a quick smile.
"I'll make sure everything's squared away on my end."
Kara smiled, a glimmer of relief in her eyes.
"Good. I'm glad you're part of the team, John. It's nice to have someone I trust watching his back."
John felt a pang of guilt at her words, but he pushed it aside. He was doing his job, even if she didn't know the full truth.
"Always,"
he replied, his voice steady. After a bit more conversation, John excused himself and made his way toward the landing strip of the ministry's private hangar. He needed to inspect the ship the minister would be using for the trip. If anything was going to go wrong, it would likely happen before they even left the capital. The hangar was a sprawling facility, with rows of sleek, high-tech ships lined up, ready for deployment. As John approached the minister's personal transport, he immediately noted its design. A large, luxurious vessel built more for comfort than combat. The ship gleamed under the hangar lights, its hull polished to perfection, and from the outside, it was clear that this was no ordinary military vessel. John's first impression: beautiful, but vulnerable. He stepped inside the ship, his eyes scanning every corner of the interior. The ship's luxury was undeniable. Plush seating, polished wooden panels, and advanced entertainment systems that lined the walls. But despite its opulence, John's instincts told him to be cautious. A ship like this would attract attention, and without proper defenses, it would be easy to target. Moving through the cabin, John pulled out a small handheld device that Mark had given him earlier. A sophisticated tool designed to detect explosives, hidden tracking devices, or sabotage. He began systematically sweeping the ship, starting with the exterior hull. As he walked around the perimeter of the ship, John noticed a lack of visible weaponry. There were no turrets, no mounted guns, nothing that indicated the ship was prepared for any kind of attack. Its only real defense seemed to be its advanced shield systems, cutting-edge technology capable of withstanding powerful energy blasts. But it was still no substitute for a proper defense system.
The shields are good,
John muttered to himself, checking the readings on his device.
But the ship's basically defenseless if anything gets past them.
Continuing his sweep, John checked for any signs of tampering. The ship seemed clean, no explosives, no hidden devices, everything appeared to be in order, but John's instincts kept him on edge. If an assassination attempt was planned, the attackers would likely wait for the right moment. And once they were away from the capital, out in the open space surrounding ZXF 5090, it would be the perfect opportunity to strike. Satisfied with his inspection, John stepped out of the ship and made his way back to the ministry building. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the trip was more dangerous than anyone was willing to admit. As he walked, his mind raced with plans. Ways to keep the minister safe, ways to outmaneuver any potential attackers. Once inside the ministry again, John headed straight for the security room. The guards stationed outside nodded as he passed, their faces showing no sign of suspicion. Inside, the room was filled with monitors displaying feeds from the building's extensive surveillance system, along with secure communication terminals. John sat down at one of the terminals and logged in, establishing a secure connection to the shadows of the night headquarters. A moment later, the encrypted screen flickered to life, and he was greeted by the stern face of a senior operative.
"John,"
the operative said, his voice low.
"What's the situation? I've just received word from Kara. There's been a change in the minister's schedule."
John replied, keeping his voice steady.
"He's heading to ZXF 590 for a few days of vacation. He'll be escorted by his personal guards, including me, and 5 ships from the diplomatic corps. No additional reinforcements have been requested."
The operative's expression remained neutral, but John could sense the concern.
"That's a lot of firepower, but also a lot of potential exposure. What's your assessment?"
John leaned back, thinking carefully.
"The ship he's using is luxurious but unarmed. The shields are advanced, but if anything breaches them, we're sitting ducks. I've scanned the ship for explosives or tracking devices, and it came up clean, but I don't like how vulnerable it is. We need additional backup."
The operative nodded, understanding the unspoken request.
"What do you need?" "I want 2 of our invisible ships from the Shadows fleet to escort the convoy from a distance,"
John said, his tone firm.
"Keep them out of sight. If anything goes wrong, we'll need them ready to intervene. I don't trust that whoever's planning this assassination is going to back down just because we have 5 Praetorian ships with us."
The operative remained silent for a moment, considering the request. Finally, he nodded.
"I'll authorize the deployment. You'll have your backup."
John felt a sense of relief wash over him, though he didn't let it show. The Shadows were always a step ahead, but having 2 invisible ships tailing the convoy would give him peace of mind.
"Good,"
John said.
"I'll keep you updated as things progress. Stay sharp, John. This could escalate quickly."
The connection ended, and John sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The next day would be critical. If the threat was real, it would manifest when they were far from the safety of the capital, out in the isolated reaches of ZXF 590. And John knew one thing for certain: he couldn't let his guard down for a second. Standing, John adjusted his jacket and headed out of the security room. Tomorrow, the mission will begin in earnest. And this time, he'd be ready. The next day began like any other. The sun was barely rising as John, Kara, and the minister's 9 escorts gathered in front of the ministry's private hangar. The air was crisp, the early morning stillness giving an eerie calm to the day ahead. John stood tall in his sleek, black, bulletproof suit, his mind alert, but his demeanor relaxed. His gaze occasionally drifted toward Kara, who smiled back at him, looking just as sharp and focused as always. 5 minutes later, the door to the hangar slid open, and the Minister of Defense entered, flanked by his personal secretary and Kara. The bodyguards, including John, immediately snapped to attention, saluting in unison. The minister, his expression one of calm authority, acknowledged them with a curt nod. John studied him closely, as always. He was a man who carried the weight of the Dominion's security on his shoulders, and John knew all too well that the threat against his life was very real. With everyone present, the minister gave a final glance at the sleek, luxurious ship that awaited them. After a brief exchange of pleasantries and formalities, the guards and the minister boarded, and soon the ship's engines hummed to life. As the hangar doors opened, the ship lifted into the sky, soon joined by 5 heavily armed warships from the diplomatic corps of the Praetorian Guard, their sleek forms flanking the minister's vessel like silent sentinels. The journey to ZXF 590 was uneventful at first, the kind of quiet that made John's instincts sharpen even further. Seated across from Kara in the passenger cabin, John passed the time reminiscing about their days at the academy. Kara laughed, recounting old training exercises and sparring session. Her laughter was infectious, and for a while, it felt like they were just 2 old friends enjoying a moment of peace. But John could never fully relax. His mind was always calculating, analyzing. Something about the entire situation felt too calm, too perfect. His training with the Shadows had taught him to always be on guard, and today, that training was gnawing at him. As the convoy of ships approached the orbit of ZXF 590, the lush, serene planet came into view, its green and blue hues contrasting against the vast blackness of space. John was standing by one of the windows, gazing out at the planet when he felt it, a sudden tension in the air. Then it happened. The 9 guards, led by Lieutenant Carl, suddenly moved as one. John's instincts screamed at him, but before he could react, Carl lunged at him, throwing a vicious punch with all his strength. The blow caught John off guard, hitting him squarely in the jaw and sending him crashing to the floor. Pain shot through his body, but John fought to keep control, his training kicking in. He could hear Kara scream his name in shock and horror, but John forced himself to remain still, his mind racing. Stay down. Play along. Figure out what they want. John lay on the floor, his body motionless, pretending to be unconscious. His heightened senses, courtesy of his implants, allowed him to monitor every movement, every sound. He could hear Lieutenant Carl approaching Kara. The sound of his boots thudding on the metal floor sent a wave of anger through John's chest, but he held himself back. Kara's scream was followed by a sickening thud as Carl grabbed her by the hair and slammed her to the ground next to John. John could feel Kara's body trembling beside him, her breath shallow with fear. He fought the urge to spring to his feet, to protect her, but he needed more information. Acting too soon could ruin everything.
Keep an eye on them.
Carl barked at one of the other guards, his voice dripping with malice. Meanwhile, in another part of the ship, the Minister of Defense was alerted by the commotion. He rushed toward the source of the noise, but as soon as he stepped into the corridor, he was ambushed. A brutal punch to the stomach sent the minister stumbling forward, collapsing to his knees, gasping for air. The minister's eyes widened as Carl approached him, kneeling to grab the man's hair, forcing him to look up.
I've waited 5 years to do this,
Carl hissed, his voice low and venomous.
Resistance will win.
The minister's eyes, though filled with pain, remained defiant.
What is this?
Carl's face twisted with hatred.
We are the descendants of the heroes who fell on Vega 20 years ago. When our people wanted independence, you aristocratic dogs massacred the entire planet under the Emperor's orders. But this time, the revolution will succeed. It starts with your death and then the Emperor will fall.
The minister, still breathing hard, chuckled darkly, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth.
So the remnants, of that pathetic rebellion finally crawl out of hiding. For you want, old man.
Carl sneered.
Your death is just the beginning.
The minister's gaze was unwavering.
Do you think you'll reach the Emperor? Fool. He gave your people every chance to surrender, and they chose destruction. Even if I die here, my loyalty remains with the Empire. Long live the Emperor.
Furious, Carl slammed his fist into the minister's face once more, sending him sprawling onto the floor. With a savage growl, Carl pulled out his gun, loading a plasma round and aiming it at the minister's head. And that's when John made his move. He had been lying still long enough. The moment Carl's gun clicked, Joan's instincts flared. In one swift fluid motion, John activated his implants, flooding his muscles with enhanced speed and strength. With a surge of energy, John rose from the floor, his body moving like a blur as his hands reached behind him, unsheathing the two plasma swords concealed beneath his suit. The guards never saw it coming. In the blink of an eye, John appeared between two of Carl's men. Before they could react, Joan's plasma blades cut through the air, decapitating both men in a single, seamless motion. Their bodies hit the floor before their minds even registered the attack. Without pausing, John spun forward, slicing through the barrel of another guard's plasma rifle with one blade, while his other sword slashed through the chest of a fourth guard. The remaining guards were paralyzed by shock, their weapons still half raised, unable to comprehend the blur of motion that was John. But John didn't stop. His focus was absolute, his moves deadly. His implants gave him the edge he needed. Every movement precise and lethal. John lunged forward, thrusting one of his swords into the chest of the fifth guard, while his other blade pierced the skull of the sixth, killing them both instantly. He barely registered the blood that spattered across his suit. His mind focused on one thing: protecting the minister. Carl, realizing his men were being slaughtered, turned to fire, but John was faster. He stepped in front of the minister just as the lieutenant fired, the bullet slamming into Joan's back, but his suit absorbed the brunt of the impact. With a savage twist, John hurled one of his plasma swords into the seventh guard's chest, dropping him instantly. John didn't stop. His body was a storm of motion, a blur of calculated violence. With his free hand, he grabbed another guard's rifle and slammed it into the man's face with brutal force, knocking him unconscious. 2 more steps, and John was on Carl. He grabbed the lieutenant's gun with one hand and twisted his head with the other, snapping Carl's neck in a single, swift motion. Carl's body crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The last guard, wounded and dying, fumbled with a device, sending a signal before John's hunting knife flew across the room, embedding itself deep into his chest. The guard fell to the floor, his body twitching before finally going still. It was over. John stood there, breathing hard, his plasma swords humming softly in the silence. The entire fight had taken no more than a few seconds, but it had felt like a lifetime. Blood and bodies littered the floor around him, but Joan's focus remained sharp. He turned to the minister, who was still on his knees, bloodied but alive. John reached down, helping him to his feet.
Minister, are you okay?
The minister nodded weakly, his eyes wide with shock.
I think so.
As John turned, his gaze locked onto Kara. She had been watching the entire fight, her expression frozen in disbelief. Her eyes were wide, her body trembling. But it wasn't just the violence that had shocked her. It was John. The way he moved, the cold, calculating precision with which he had killed, the look in his eyes, the detachment, the icy calm. For a moment, Kara said nothing. She just stared at John, unable to reconcile the man she had known with the ruthless fighter she had just witnessed. And John, for the first time, felt the weight of his secret bearing down on him like never before.